CitrusTV News live at 6, your campus news leader.
Today's rose-laying ceremony marked the end of this year's Remembrance Week. The university honors 35 students who lost their lives in the Pan Am crash that occurred nearly 31 years ago in Lockerbie, Scotland. Good evening, I'm Greg Bradbury.
And I'm Anthony DeBundo. We will be dedicating the beginning of this show to Remembrance Week and all those lives lost in the tragedy. First, we'd like to honor the victims who were students at SU, just like Greg, myself, and many of our friends here at Citrus TV. And we'd like to take a moment to remember and honor the victims. Stephen Burrell was a communications and management major, as well as a member of the Phi Delta Theta fraternity.
Kenneth Brissett was a student from Cornell University, studying in London through the SU Abroad program.
Stephen Boland was a member of the Delta Tau Delta fraternity, remembered for his love of the Beatles.
Nicole Boulanger was a senior, passionate about theater from Shrewsbury, Massachusetts.
Timothy Cardwell was a member of the ROTC and was posthumously awarded the Army Commendation Medal.
Theodora Cohen was passionate about acting and singing, majoring in drama at SU.
Eric and Jason Coker were twin brothers from New Jersey. Jason wrote for the Daily Orange, and Eric studied at the University of Rochester.
Gary Colasanti was an avid skier and a member of Sigma Alpha Epsilon.
Scott Corey was an SU junior, and a memorial scholarship was set up in his name after the crash.
Gretchen Dater was studying at the Maryland Institute of Art, studying in London through SU Abroad.
Shannon Davis was passionate about children and one day planned to open a daycare center.
Teron Ergin was an actor and a member of the SU lacrosse team.
John Flynn was a Colgate University junior and a player on the men's basketball team.
Pamela Herbert was a Bowdoin College junior and won many academic awards during her college career.
Karen Lee Hunt was an English major working toward a magazine career. She is remembered as being a warm and caring person.
Christopher Jones was an SU junior. He wrote for the Daily Orange and reported for WAER Radio.
Julianne Kelly was a public relations major and loved to write poetry in her spare time.
Wendy Lincoln was studying photography and illustration. Friends and family say her greatest joy was helping others.
Alexander Lowenstein wanted to become a clinical psychologist and was a member of the Zeta Psi fraternity.
Suzanne Miazga was studying social work and wanted to better the lives of others in her future.
Richard Minetti studied journalism and wrote in a journal that his philosophy to life was to make the most of everything.
Anne Otanezik was learning sign language to fulfill her goal of bettering the lives of deaf children.
Peter Pierce was coming home from Florence, where he was pursuing a master's to teach design.
Sarah Phillips was a junior at the University of Colorado at Boulder and wanted to be either a publisher or a lawyer.
Frederick Phillips had returned to school after working in business. He's remembered for his love of music and poetry.
Louise Ann Rogers was a senior studying through SU Abroad and is remembered as someone who did everything with style.
Thomas Schultz was a member of the Phi Delta Theta fraternity and planned to attend law school after graduation.
Amy Elizabeth Shapiro was a passionate writer and photographer and worked for multiple publications during her time on campus.
Cynthia Smith was studying fashion and design and was a member of the Delta Phi Epsilon sorority.
Mark Tobin was studying to become a sports journalist, and his friends and family remember him as always being optimistic.
Alexia Saris was a junior, and professors remember her as one of the most promising photojournalists of her class.
Nicholas Vrenios always carried his camera, guitar, and a skateboard wherever he went, including when he went to London. He is remembered for his favorite expression, "Go for it."
Kesha Whedon is remembered for her love of children and her dedication to music.
Miriam Wolfe spent her semester abroad studying dance and acting, and her family remembers her for her exuberant personality.
Today's rose-laying ceremony brought together Remembrance scholars, families and friends of the victims, and the SU community. Our photojournalist Ricky Sayer was at the event and shows us how SU celebrated its victims.
"31 years after the tragedy, this community seeks to act forward. The privilege of being a Remembrance scholar is carrying the spirit of the 35 students we lost with us on a daily basis.
She cared deeply about our world and the pain and suffering of others. She was always there to make you laugh, but she was also your shoulder to cry on.
In each of life's losses, he saw not defeat, but an opportunity to better himself and others around him.
He loved Syracuse University and once dyed his hair bright orange to show off his school pride.
A dear friend of Alexi, Janice Cunningham, wrote, "You are always the sunshine, but the sun hasn't set for you, Alex, my friend. It has only risen on another beach."
There will always be a scar, though to remind these two communities of what happened on the 21st of December 1988.
Alexia was sensitive, bright, and ambitious. She believed that we cannot live in fear, and hoped that her life's work would one day make a difference in a world torn by injustice, conflict, and human suffering. It has.
She was an avid writer and a caring person who wrote this poem for a friend. "Someday soon, from now till forever, I'll meet you again, and we'll be together. I'm not sure how, and I'm not sure when. Together forever, summer I thought. I lay this rose on behalf of Karen, and act forward and remember.
I lay this rose on behalf of Scott.
I lay this rose on behalf of Steve.
I lay this rose on behalf of Nicole.
I lay this rose on behalf of Alexander.
I lay this rose on behalf of Peter and act forward in his memory."
Beautiful story there by Ricky Sayer. One of the last people to lay a rose was Lauren Crimmins. Earlier this week, I sat down with her to hear her connection with the victims she represents. Today, Lauren Crimmins laid down a rose on the Remembrance wall, but her journey as a Remembrance scholar began when she first stepped on campus.
So it was really my first week on campus that I knew I wanted to apply to be a Remembrance scholar.
Crimmins represents Miriam Wolfe, one of the 35 Syracuse University students who died when a bomb exploded on Pan Am Flight 103. Her connection to Wolfe began at last year's rose-laying ceremony and continued when she visited Lockerbie, Scotland during her time abroad.
There is this small chapel where there are a few books. One of them, each page has one name of each of the 270 victims, and another book is On Eagle's Wings, which is dedicated to each of the victims. And then there's a third book in the corner of the room for visitors to sign. And I had a friend who was a Remembrance scholar at the time, so I signed for her, but I also wrote a note to Miriam. And at that time, I had just interviewed to be a Remembrance scholar. I didn't know if I was going to be one yet, and I didn't know if I was chosen to be a Remembrance scholar, whether or not I would be paired with Miriam. And I wrote a note to her promising her that I would always aim to marry her two passions of entertainment and advocacy and move forward and look forward and act forward in her honor in that way for the rest of my life.
Crimmins would soon be selected to represent Miriam Wolfe as a Remembrance scholar. The two share a common passion for entertainment and social justice.
Miriam was a musical theater major, and she had a passion for advocacy, social and political justice, and also the power of theater and entertainment. So she wanted to create an alternative theater group on campus, and she wanted to center it around social and political issues and raise awareness for AIDS research and rape prevention and women's rights.
Crimmins is the vice president of University Union, a group that plans large events for the campus community. This week, a special event shared Miriam Wolfe's message.
University Union is collaborating with the LGBT Resource Center and the Disability Cultural Center to bring Ryan O'Connell, a comedian who identifies as gay and disabled and is an advocate for representation in entertainment. And throughout the entire planning process of this event, Miriam has inspired me, and it's actually officially dedicated to her in Remembrance Week.
For Crimmins, this is one way to look back and act forward, but she says that each student on campus can find a way to do the same.
I am one of many kids on this campus that mirror traits and aspirations and goals of the victims that passed away, and I'm lucky enough to try to represent and embody one of the victims, Miriam, this year. But I really think that all of us mirror something in these victims.
For Lauren Crimmins, she may have set down a rose for Miriam Wolfe today, but she will carry her with her throughout life.
So I hope that years from now, when I come back here and I'm sitting here by this wall again, I feel like I've learned more and more from Miriam, and I'm not done learning from her and honoring her.
As Crimmins continues her senior year, be on the lookout for the ways University Union is combining entertainment and social advocacy with her help.
And while we reflect on how the crash affected our own campus community, there is another community many miles away that is experiencing a similar pain in relation to the Pan Am flight. That town is Lockerbie, Scotland, where the flight crashed many years ago. Our executive producer, Isha Batu, takes us across the Atlantic to that town's tale. Isha?
About 7 months ago, while I was studying abroad in London, I had the opportunity to go to Lockerbie as a Lockerbie ambassador. There, I got to speak to many members of the community, including one man who was a firefighter on the scene the night of the disaster. What he told me was a story not of tragedy, but of hope, love, and resilience.
It was the biggest UK crime at the time and was one of the biggest crimes in world history up until 2001, and it happened right here in this most rural, peaceful town, so that the contrast couldn't have been more stark.
That rural, peaceful town is Lockerbie, Scotland. Made up of just about 4,000 people, everything changed for the residents of Lockerbie when flight Pan Am 103 blew up in the sky nearly 31 years ago, crashing into the small town and taking the lives of 11 people on the ground and all 259 on board. Colin Dorrance was a firefighter on scene that night, and he remembers the immediate impact of the crash. Lives lost, fire blazing through the sky, homes completely destroyed. He also remembers the long-term impact the incident left on the people in his town.
I had post-traumatic stress disorder to deal with. We couldn't talk about what happened here. There were difficulties with relationships because of all of that. Domestic issues, alcoholism were all things that were there beneath the surface and needed to be dealt with.
This darkness, however, did not last forever.
Slowly but surely, hope sprung from what was such a terrible dark day, that relationships across the Atlantic sprung up. The scholarship struck up between the local school here in Syracuse University, and the town see that as the most important thing and the silver lining in what was a very dark cloud.
Dorrance is describing the Lockerbie Scholar Program, in which 2 students from Lockerbie come to SU to study each year for free.
Pan Am 103 must never happen again, and we need to get that message out there that we will not be defeated by terrorism, but the response is one of love, not hate.
And while the Pan Am tragedy is a major part of Lockerbie's history, Dorrance stresses that the town is a lot more than its past.
I would encourage people to come here and see it not just through a 30-year-old lens, but see it for what it is today and for the future.
Although the university mourns the tragedy in October, the town of Lockerbie especially mourns in December, the month in which the incident actually happened. Last year, for the 30th anniversary, the community held an emotional ceremony at Driftsdale Cemetery, which is the main memorial of the crash. Guys, back to you.